welcome to Relentlessly Resilient, where we embrace life challenges with courage and growth. I'm Michelle Scharf, bringing you real stories of resilience and the tools to heal, rise, and thrive. No one's path is easy, but together we can find strength and joy in the journey. Let's dive in. Joining me today is Christopher Lee Maher, a former Navy SEAL turned holistic wellness expert. After years of peak performance, he realized hidden stress was taking a toll on his health, and that led him to create True Body Intelligence, a powerful approach to healing and unlocking our full potential. Christopher, welcome to Relentlessly Resilient.
Happy to be here.
I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to have you here. I was really excited when I got the call to have you on the show, just because your background, it kind of coalesces with my background of
Yeah.
energy work, healing, those kind of modalities. And so I was really excited, and I am super excited to learn more about TBI and a little bit more about you as well. And what brought you to that point where you realized, I may be at peak physical external health, but I'm dying inside.
Yeah,
So,
to be honest with you, it was a shock to me
okay.
because my whole life I was, reasonably healthy, right? Maybe I would get the flu after getting a flu shot, of course. Um, and dealt with, the little things you deal with every once in a while, a headache maybe here and
Hmm.
there, and maybe as an athlete I'd have a little pain, but then the pain would dissipate within like 5 or 6 days, right? And it would disappear. And then suddenly, I remember I was driving with a friend of mine named Christopher Warburton, and we were driving from Point Loma somewhere north in San Diego. And I was singing a song that was on the radio, and he was like, "Dude, those aren't the lyrics." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Those are not the lyrics." And at that point, I was like, "Oh, I can't hear. I'm not hearing." And then another song came on, and I was singing that song. He's like, "Those aren't the lyrics either, man. Like, are you going deaf?" And I was like, "Hmm." And that was probably at about 20, what I've been there, 28 years old.
Wow.
And so that was very young. And then at some point, I remember I was starting to read people's lips, right? So when you start losing your hearing, it's a little bit of a shock, but I was the type of a person, because I went to SEAL training and I was indoctrinated through boarding school for 10 years and in the military for 8 years, that you just don't complain, you don't whine, you don't bitch, and you don't moan, because it affects the emotional stability of the entire group. So
Right.
I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to keep this to myself, and I think it'll just sort itself out.
Yeah.
And it didn't sort itself out. It just kept getting worse. And then,
It's
go
it's
ahead.
interesting, and I wonder how many people kind of have this experience. I didn't realize I was reading lips until COVID hit and people started wearing masks. And I was like realizing I was looking, trying to like see through their mask. And I'm
Yeah,
like, what am I doing? And I'm like, I've been I've been reading
and
lips.
people. Yep.
So,
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people had that discovery from COVID, because I think, like, I don't have a large hearing loss. In fact, I went in and had it tested. They're like, you're fine. I have a small high frequency in one ear that is kind of dimming out. But it was enough for me to start really focusing on people's lips. And it's interesting because when you start to lose your hearing, it's very subtle,
Yes.
but you you somehow intuitively know to start creating other compensation
It just
ways.
naturally happens. It
Right. It
was
just
something that I
you don't
was
notice
like,
it.
yeah, and I didn't. So people would call my name, and then they would speak loudly, and then I'd turn around and go, "What?" And I go, "Dude, what's up?" Like, I called your name 5 times. Like, I'm not trying to ignore you. I just didn't hear you.
Right.
Okay. So then the next thing that happened, I started losing my vision. Okay. And when you start losing your vision, then it's really intense. It's really, really intense because I was just used to picking up a magazine or a book and just reading. And the problem with this is that I was still very young, right? So,
Mhm.
yes, if I was in my late 50s, early 60s, I need reading glasses. But the problem was this: Monday, I had great vision. Then suddenly Wednesday, I don't. What happened between Monday and Wednesday?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? That's crazy. So, and I think it's sort of what you're talking about. You just sort of just compensate. And I wasn't understanding the compensations that I was making. And then
Hmm.
eventually, anything that was happening on a magazine or a phone or my book, I was just pushing things away from my face so that I could see them more clearly.
Yeah.
And then I had joint pain in my left hip, and I couldn't get away from that. And by the time I was 33, I needed a hip replacement. And so I thought, okay, this is all shutting down a little too quickly. And so I just decided to reach out and ask for help. And somebody showed up to my house with a yoga mat and a juicer. And I found out that my body was rusty. I was like an old rusty car from the junkyard, right? Underneath the hood and inside the car. But on the outside, the paint job, oh, it was very nice. The
Hmm.
paint job was fabulous. But underneath the hood and inside the car and in the trunk, everything was rusty.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I
so
can imagine if you were in the Navy SEALs, not only did you like have your annual flu shot, they
for
pump you
sure,
full of
all kinds of
vaccines
gamma
and
globulin shots and
yeah.
vaccines and all, we have a list of shots that we need to have every year when you're in your platoon, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, just have your records of the shots that they give you. And yeah, and for someone, I don't know if you study any bit of human design, but in human design, I have what's called I have open immunity, which
Oh,
means I can have Western medicine. Western medicine never helps me, it hurts me. I
wow.
have to go a holistic route, right? I have to have things that are more natural because of my open immunity. And so you're absolutely spot on. Because when I was in the military, I remember this, I had like yellow and green snot at some point during the year. I was coughing up phlegm, at different, let's say maybe once every 3 months, I was going through this purging that was constantly happening. The second I got out of the military, right, all that stopped. But what started was all the tightness in my body.
That's
And when you
really
get tight,
interesting. Did it feel like inflammation? Did you feel like you were just like your body was kind of out of whack and you were just
no, I think what happened was this, is I was training for the Olympic trials.
oh,
Okay. That was my dream. And a dream that was never realized. I trained but got nowhere because I had a body that was riddled with pain. And I think what happened is, in retrospect, understanding everything I understand about stress now, is that your body can only overcome the stress from that day by the sleep that night. So let's say I'm getting up and I'm putting in 100 watts of stress, right? But my sleep is insufficient. And so I'm only recovering from 60 of those watts. So now I got 40 that's now being carried from Monday into Tuesday. So now instead on Tuesday, I have the 40 from Monday plus the 100 from Tuesday. And the compound effect of that over decades eventually catches up with you. And the body says, look, I
it can
can't
only take
hold
so
any,
much.
yeah, there's no more space in this body to hold stress. So
Yeah.
I need to start shutting you down so you lay down and do nothing. When I started to pay attention to this, when I was probably in grade school, I thought, man, it's interesting that when I get sick, I don't want to eat anything. I'm not hungry. All I want to do is lay down and drink hot tea. It's the only thing that I ever wanted to do. And I always wanted to lay down on something that was cold. So if there was a tile floor or a hardwood floor, I would just lay on that cold floor and I would feel better. So what does that tell you? It tells you that my body was excessively hot. And
Hmm.
so as I laid on the cold and I pulled away from food and I drank hot tea, guess what would happen? My body would start to regulate itself. And then boom, within 3 days, I would feel good again. And
Yeah.
I started to pay attention to this relationship between temperature and wellness. And then as I grew through this whole process that I'm explaining to you and started to learn about healing and integration and stress and personal development, I always related things back to temperature. And I realized that's the one thing, that's the missing conversation in Western medicine. It's also the missing conversation in holistic medicine. No one's ever talking about temperature.
Yeah. Um, Chinese medicine does talk about that.
Yeah, a little bit, but they don't have a conversation of temperature in terms of how it affects you emotionally, right? The
Right,
conversation is hot or cold,
right.
okay?
Well, so they do in Chinese medicine, they do refer to heat as yang or
Yeah,
yang, and
yeah,
and they do talk about how that creates misfires and misbalance in the meridians, and it can
yeah,
cause inflammation. It does refer to literal heat in the body.
yeah.
But you're
Well, what I'm
right.
saying, yeah, yeah, in terms of emotion. So if we
Right.
look at love as warmth
Mm-hmm.
and we look at confidence and tranquility and peace as cool, well, when we get to cold, what we're looking at is anger. I mean, when we get to cold, what we're looking at is fear. When we get to hot, we're looking at anger. But when we get to boiling, which would be fire, what we're talking about is rage. And
Mm-hmm.
when we get to freezing, we're talking about fright, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start to relate those temperatures
Mm-hmm.
to emotional
Actions.
expressions of behavior, now we're having a different conversation
Yeah.
because now I can look at my behavior and see, am I too hot or am I too cold? I don't need to stick out my tongue to have someone look at it, and I don't need anyone to take my pulse. I can tell you based on my behavior, right? And so when I look at things, I look at them physically, I look at them energetically in terms of electromagnetic energy, but I also look at them emotionally and psychologically. And so when we talk about true body intelligence, what we're talking about is a system that has to address you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And when I say spiritually, I mean energetically.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at all of those factors, now we can start to build a more complete whole picture of what's going on for the person because people are well aware of what upsets them,
Yes.
right? And they're well aware of their fears. And if we can begin the conversation there, that conversation lets me know whether or not you're too hot or you're too cold, and where you're too hot and you're too cold. Because stress, when it comes in the body, it's either going to shut you down or it's going to overactivate you. It's going to create too much stimulation. And so the question is, how do we create a successful pattern interrupt into these stress patterns that are running underneath at a subconscious level, at an unconscious level, at a superconscious level, and at a conscious level? Well, if we look at the brain as conscious form of intelligence, meaning my ability in the moment to be aware of what is occurring, and
Mm-hmm.
we look at the breath as controlling the unconscious, then when we say the word subconscious, we know that sub means below. And what does it mean? It means below conscious. So
Mm-hmm.
conscious is here, unconscious is in your breath, subconscious is in your body, and your superconscious is in your auric field, which has 13 varying layers of density that reach in to the very edge of God or the divine or the unit, whatever you want to call it. But there's 13 layers of varying densities that move from the outer edge of source and into the very center of your spine. And so I like to get people to relate temperature to emotions. And so then what I'm looking to do, whether it's through massage or it's energy work or it's body work or it's a form of transmutation or
Mm-hmm.
transfiguration, I want to be able to address the conscious, the unconscious, the subconscious, and superconscious over a 5 day period to bring them into balance and then to teach them how to remove the varying layers of density, which would be first, second, and third layers of density that exist in their body, which would be bone, muscle, and fascia. And if I can reduce their lifetime accumulated stress load that's sitting inside of their fascia, inside of their bones, inside of their muscles, then guess what's going to happen? Their temperature's automatically going to come down. And if it's too low, their temperature's automatically going to come up. And then I can teach them how to do that to themselves relative to each meridian that they're working in. And I'm glad you brought up Chinese medicine because I feel like, okay, acupuncture is okay and herbs are great, but at the end of the day, I have to go to an acupuncturist in order to be treated.
Right.
But there's something in Chinese medicine called TMMs, and those are called tendomuscular channels. And the tendomuscular channels, if you open those up, you don't need to be needled. Okay? You don't need to have the
Right. That's
herbs.
the whole point of the acupuncture. It's to stimulate the meridian to light up.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
if I can light that up on my own, now I can maintain a high state of wellness. And let's say the average human is at like a 3.6 out of 10 in terms of their development. Well, each day that I go into my body and I open these caverns, what's happening is I'm allowing the shadow and the darkness, right, to leave. But now that they're open, I'm inviting in the light and the love and the presence.
Hmm.
And so then how do you do that on a consistent basis? And so in True Body Intelligence, this is what I teach people.
So is this like a 5 day course? You go to you where are you
Yeah,
located?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles now.
Yeah, yes.
We were talking before the show, and you spend a lot of time in San Diego area, which is fun. But so Los Angeles area, and so do you have like courses that
Yeah,
you
so what,
offer?
what so what I have is I have a public facing business, which is True Body Intelligence, and then I have a private boutique business, which is private, which is called Rational Intimate Transfiguration. Why? Because it's rational, it's based on logic and science, it's intimate, and we transfigure, right? There's transformation. So if there's change, there's transformation, there's transmutation, and there's transfiguration, right?
Mhm.
Change is what occurs in the mind. You can change a mindset,
Right.
right? Transformation is what occurs inside the emotional body, all right? Transmutation is what occurs at the fit at transmutation is what occurs at the superconscious level, your energy fields, and transfiguration is what occurs at the body.
Okay.
Okay, because we're literally transfiguring your body. We're
Okay.
changing your posture, we're changing how your thighs sit on top of your lower legs, how your hips sit on top of your thighs, how your spine sits on top of your hips, all the way out to your fingers.
And
And
how
so
long does that take for somebody?
that's a 5 day process.
No matter how bad of health they are, like
Yep,
it's
that's a 5 day process. And
wow.
so if they want to come back, 90 days later, a year later, we can take it to another level. But
Hmm.
ultimately, the most important step in development is healthy boundaries,
Hmm.
hon- honoring your principles, communicating clearly, and being authentically self-expressed.
Hmm.
And if you can be those things, you can grow beyond the first tier of development, the first tier of wellness, which is lung, large intestine, spleen, pancreas, and stomach. Because
Okay.
if your digestion is good and your elimination, right? The lungs are part of elimination and the colon is part of elimination. If you're eliminating at a very high level and you're digesting at a high level, you're going to live a long time.
Wow.
you're going to live a really, really long time because those
Well, I
organs,
think that that's the core problem we're having in America right now. It all starts
yeah,
with our gut. You hear it all the
yeah,
time. You can be on TikTok or Facebook Reels or whatever. You hear all these doctors talking about all of the processed foods and how it's destroying our gut and leaky gut syndrome. And
yeah,
so, yeah, it makes sense, right? If our elimination system isn't working properly, how are we releasing the toxins that we're
for sure.
feeding?
Yep. And so when you look at the microbiome, it should really honestly be considered its own organ,
Hmm.
right? Which I would then attach to the appendix as controlling and operating the microbiome. And, thousands and thousands of years ago, before the invention of cooked food and alcohol, right? The microbiomes were very, very healthy. Why? Because cooked food and alcohol destroys healthy bacteria. Okay? Kills unhealthy bacteria, but also destroys healthy bacteria. And
Yeah.
bacteria is responsible for making a large portion of our neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
And so,
Now they're even doing a lot of like Western medical is actually embracing fecal implant transplants for
yeah, for
people
sure. Yeah,
to help change the biome in a person that they're using it for all kinds of things, weight loss, um, borderline diabetes stuff, all kinds of stuff they're using it for, and they're finding success with that. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right?
yeah. And so, true body intelligence, the question is, what are we attempting to do? We're attempting to interfere with that root-based survival strategy that they created as a child. Because if you reverse engineer disease or dis-ease, well, what's on the left, you're going to have stress.
Hmm.
On the right, you're going to have distortion, right? Well, what's in the middle? Tension,
Yeah.
okay? Well, what creates tension? Inflammation. What creates inflammation? Anything you put into your body, whether it's a beverage and or a food, if it's unnatural, it puts your body in an unnatural state of function because the body has to adapt to your choices. So
Yeah.
if we can go in and we can align the brain, the body, and the nervous system into a high state of function, then naturally people are attracted to different foods, to different beverages.
Right.
And then they stop the excessive stimulation. And excessive stimulation, when you look at somebody who's swollen, like I have a gentleman here this week, and he's swollen. And I look at people, he says, "Oh, well, I'm fat." And I said, "No, you're not fat. You're wet." And that's a different concept for someone. What do you mean I'm wet? I mean that your body's so hot inside, it's holding on to an excessive amount of fluid to maintain your temperature at 98.6 degrees. So if I put food in and I put in beverage that's unnatural, it puts me into an unnatural state of existence, which creates naturally inflammation. But what's the inflammation there to do? To balance out the excessive heat, because now my organs are all working overtime.
Right. So, what would a person expect coming to your place and having
Okay.
this 5-day experience? Like day one, are you like
I'd say day
bath and
one.
cleansing or
No, no,
water
no.
intake?
When they 3 days before they get here, there's no alcohol, there's no sugar, there's no nicotine, no caffeine. They're off all of the daily acceptable drugs. Like
Mhm.
that's the first step. Then they come here, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to do an investigation because when they come in the door, the thing that they're dealing with is the bait to get them in the chair. Once they're in the chair, we need to figure out why are you really here?
Right, it's 10 layers deep, right? It's
Yeah.
it's not usually what they think it's for.
Yeah. So we'll do a deep investigation, and after the investigation is over, then we're gonna have intention setting, and then their intention is the driver for what it is they want to experience. And I say, okay, well, what is it that you really like? What do you want to get out of this experience? And then once they name what it is they want, then And then we start figuring it all out. And then I walk them through the process relative to their intention.
Hmm.
And then we start pulling out massive amounts of tension, massive amounts of stress, and massive amounts of distortion. And let's say, this guy who's here this week is like 60 plus, right?
Hmm.
So it took him 60 years to get here, which is, that's a long time. That's 6 decades.
Yeah.
If I can reduce his lifetime accumulated stress load by 50% in 5 days, it would take him another 30 years to get him back up to the point where he is now.
Right.
And so my first goal is to reduce that by 50%. And I do that by
Awesome.
going into the master channel in traditional Chinese medicine, which is called the bladder channel, right? Because the bladder is very interesting. It's the top of the bottom of your body. It's the bottom of the top. From left to right, it's directly in the middle. And from back to front, it's directly in the middle. So they call that the master channel. It's the master organ in the body because it's the center for fluid. And humans are made up of what? They're made up of water.
Water.
And so if we can get the water channels flowing, then everything else in our life really sort of works. And I put a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And the average person, when I get into that channel, their discomfort level
Hmm.
is a 10 out of 10.
So for someone who might have a little bit of understanding of energy work, body work, these different kind of modalities, when you say you're getting into that bladder channel, what are you doing? Are you like laying on of hands? Is it energy?
Yeah, it's laying on of feet. So what
Okay.
we're doing, we're using a combination of rhythm, breath, and pressure. And
Okay.
they are required to breathe relative to what it is they really feel. Why? Because the bladder channel is a channel for honesty. And 95% of the people that come here, when I start working on their bladder channel, initially they're laying there like mummies. And I can see they're making these like facial expressions that are painful, right? Right?
Get off
But
my
they're, yeah,
bladder.
yeah. But their breath is silent, right? So they're
Oh,
breathing,
interesting.
so they're actually relative. If their sensation is a 10 out of 10 and their breath is at a 1, there is a serious amount of emotional distortion going on, which informs me and lets me know this person never feels comfortable being honest about how they're feeling and how other people are impacting them. And so I give them some direction. Okay, let's get your breath up to a 5. Okay, let's bring your breath up to a 7. And then by the time we bring their breath up to what they're really feeling, let's say it's a 9.5, suddenly the emotional door cracks wide open.
Yeah.
And then the tears pour. When I say tears pour, I don't mean sobbing, right? I mean heaving.
Yeah.
Like whole body, and then I let them in there, and they might sometimes they're in there for 2 or 3 hours.
Hmm.
I'm talking about grown men, professional athletes, right? Six
I'm
foot
not
five,
surprised at that at all.
265 pounds, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised about that at all. We live in a society where we've raised men to suppress their emotions. We expect them to not be rageful when we're telling them to not feel.
Yeah. And so
It
and
doesn't make
and
any sense. Of course, we have a lot of angry men that are hurting and are literally dying inside.
yeah. And so whether they're 7 or they're 70 or they're male or they're female or they're tall or short, it's irrelevant.
Hmm.
The only thing that happens is the same thing every single time. It's literally verifiable, repeatable science. I've
Right.
literally turned healing into an absolute science.
That's
And
awesome.
and so I know the outcomes that are happening are absolutely predictable because if you get your breath and to match your sensation, then what's going to happen is your body's going to let go of whatever caused that initial distortion from your childhood. And then I'll go in and I'll ask, did you have any memories? And some of them have some, and
Hmm.
some of them don't. And if they don't have a memory, then that lets me know that it happened. Whatever they let go of was precognitive between womb and 7 years old. If they have a memory, the memory is after their precognitive state of function. And now they have insight to something that happened that transacted between either someone in their immediate family, someone who was a coach, someone who was a teacher, someone who was in a position above them, okay, of leadership. And now they have that insight and now they can let that go. So
Yeah.
now when they go home and they relate with their sister who hates them, there's no room for that hate anymore. Now, when they go home to spend time with their mom who annoys them constantly, the mom doesn't annoy them. I always get a text like 2 or 3 days later. This is incredible. My kids are doing their homework. What happened? And I'm like, what happened is you were no longer overly vested and being in control. And now that you've pulled your investment away, they have the right to be themselves. And so, whenever a parent is having a problem with a child, the child is not the problem. The child is a mirror for a problem that the parent never solved in
Right.
themselves. And so, true body intelligence helps make happier families.
I've shared this before on the show, but I was driving and it occurred to me that I started out when I was having children with the intention that I was going to do it better than my parents, which I think that's normal and somewhat healthy and fine. But then as I've raised my kids and looked back, I realized I raised them giving them all of my unmet needs as a child and making sure I covered those things. And what I neglected to do was to see my child for who they were
Mm,
and the unmet needs that they came with that had nothing to do with my childhood.
that's right.
And so I've had these conversations with my kids that are open to it. I've had long conversations with a couple of them where I'm just like, "Hey, I am so sorry. This is what we all do, by the way, but that doesn't make it okay."
Yeah.
And I am now consciously aware of it. And it is a huge epiphany to me that what I missed is to see each child individually and not continually try to bandage up that child's with my own unmet need.
Yeah.
That didn't work. It never works.
No,
It's
and then
not
what it,
working in our society. That's why we're
yeah,
having all these kids that are, you know, going no contact.
yeah, what happens, from my perspective, is that the child is then forced to go 180 degrees away from where you are to attempt to get a sense of who they are.
Yeah.
And
I have
that
one
100,
daughter that's like that.
yeah, yeah, and that 180 degrees away is not who they are.
Right.
It's actually only reaction to the proaction of the parent.
Right.
And so all the people that I work with, once we go through that 5 day process, they now give their children the space to be themselves.
Yeah.
Because why? Because guess what? The pancreas and the spleen is the center for worry. When you have a healthy pancreas and a healthy spleen, you don't worry any longer. You
Well, and
trust.
you kind of trust, right? You start to trust the process. They came to you, they have their own life's work and mission. Some of that is going to have nothing to do with you, good or bad parenting. I don't, I mean, I think there's abusive parenting and better parenting and those kind of things, but I don't like to label parenting in as much as because I've watched kids come out just amazing from terrible home lives. And I've also watched some great kid or not so great kids come from the most loving and tender and patient parents. So I think, again, that goes to we all come here as individuals with our own path, whether it's human design or astrology or whatever. We all have a path. We're born under a time, a set of stars, of whatever, right? And so we come in here with a purpose, and it's just being able to provide healthy soil and good water, right?
Yeah,
That to flourish.
love and passion and
Yeah,
inspiration, right? And nurturing because
yeah,
every child has a creator, right?
right.
We are the host. And in my hosting, am I giving them enough space to identify what their path is, what their passion is, what their interests are?
Yeah,
And do I have the patience to withhold my own projections of what I think that they should be, as opposed to following the breadcrumbs that will allow them to figure out their own identity.
Yeah. I love that you're talking about this. And I love that you're telling us that you have a 60-year-old guy in your facility right now getting work done. I think those of us, I don't know how old you are. I'm 55, so I'm Gen X. And I think so many of us were raised in rather unhealthy homes. It was kind of that era. A lot of religious overlords, children are to be seen, not heard. I'll give you something
Yes.
about.
Yep. Those are the ones I heard. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, I talk about this with a lot of my friends, and they're like, "Yep, yep, yep." We all had what I refer to as the Elvis belt, the belt in the hallway closet with the big 1-inch squares knocked out of it.
Yeah.
That thing could cast a good whip.
Yes. Yes. I relate to all of that.
Right. So, I think that we're kind of all in that area. It's really interesting to me, though, how much Gen X, like we've come along. I remember going to my grandmother's house, washing my hair, and we'd have to sit with a dryer, a bonnet over our head, and it blew cold air. It wasn't even warm.
Yeah.
You
Which is
sit in that
terrible
thing,
for your brain,
right?
by the way.
Yeah, and you're hearing that loud whir in your ears. But you'd have to sit there for like a half an hour for it to even get less dry.
Yeah.
We have come in an age of huge technology. Now we have hair dryers that blow out different temperatures. We can pick
Yeah.
our temperature of heat. We have curling irons. We have phones that we used to just have a long cord from the wall if we were lucky. And then, now we've got cell phones and now we have watches that we can make calls on. The amount of technology that we've watched and had to be kind of flexible and embrace all of this continuous change is really interesting to me. And I just kind of liken it with kind of this revolution that I see happening right
Yeah.
now, at least in the circles that I'm participating in. People are like wanting to let go of the weight of what they didn't receive in childhood and
Hmm.
be able to live their highest, best selves.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
The emotional binding. It's
yeah,
sort of like, remember, there was a point in Japan where you would bind a woman's feet so you could control the way that she walked, right?
yeah,
And so that was still going on when we were kids. It was just delivered in a different way, right? Underneath the threat of punishment. And so when you look at true body intelligence and the work that we're putting into the world, what we're looking at essentially is womb to seven, which would be subconscious precognition, and then 7 to 13, which would be unconscious precognition, and then 13 on, which is conscious cognition, right?
mhm,
When you start to wake up. So when we're a child and we're avoiding punishment, rejection, humiliation, discomfort, violence, and death, those strategies that we develop as a child end up being our winning strategy for life.
mhm.
The challenge is this, is that those strategies were developed by a child who was precognitive between womb and 7 years old, who doesn't understand reality.
Mhm.
And so now we're having to backtrack as a society and go, hold on, what happened between womb and seven? Well, I don't remember. I only have 2 or 3 memories from there. I think my childhood was good. But what we forget is that a child's nervous system is as fragile as a butterfly's wings. And when you have a parent that hits the child, when you have a parent that screams at the child, when you have a parent who reduces the child's ability to explore their environment, you're creating a reaction that is going to be experienced in their life the entirety of their existence.
Yeah.
And so, what we want to do is we want to create a successful pattern interrupt. Because when we interrupt that pattern, what's going to happen? The person is going to, their train that's on track M is now going to have an opportunity to be put back on track A. But because it's never been on track A, they don't know who they are. And now they get to reorientate. Who am I in relationship to religion? Who am I in relationship to sex? Who am I in relationship to food? Who am I in relationship to money? Who am I in relationship to education? Who am I in relationship to perspective? Who am I in relationship to communication? Who am I in relationship to power? And now a person gets to build authentically who it is they were always meant to be as potential.
Right. I love what you said, and I had to go look up while you were talking about that because a couple things. You're talking about basically in 7-year cycles, which every 7 years our cells turn over. So I think that that's really interesting that your system goes along those lines. And then also, when you're talking about the child in the womb, there was a Dr. Frederick Worth, and he is now passed away, but I took a class from him while I was studying home birth midwifery.
Hmm.
And fascinating doctor. I believe he was a neuroscientist, if I remember correctly. He came out and taught just a small group of women in a home down in Utah where I live. And he talked about the emotional transference, that baby is not separate from the mother. So in womb, the baby is not different from the mother, and in fact for the first year of that baby's life, so the emotions that the mother are even projecting after birth for that first year, the baby does not see itself as separate from the mother.
No.
So from the time of conception all the way to the time of 1 year. And so it's really, his book Prenatal Parenting talks about, okay, so you have an argument with yourself, you're dysregulated, what can you do? And he literally talks about checking in and going in and talking to that baby, regulating your own nervous system and being able to have a conversation. I'm safe. You're safe. We're going to be okay. We're working this out. I know this maybe sounded scary. Those kind of conversations,
For sure.
because words are energy and energy carry. And he just believed it was really powerful and an important thing to do. And I taught that. I believe it. I
Yep.
believe that it's
Yep.
powerful.
Yep. Super important. The reason why that happens is this. The charge on the water molecules between womb and 13 is negative. And so what does that mean? That means that every cell is receptive. What's it receptive to? It's receptive to every single thing that's in its environment. When you turn 13 years old, the charge on your water molecules changes to positive. And in that moment, you become what's called an initiating agent that's no longer receptive to what your parents have to say, to what your teachers have to say, to what your coaches have to say. Because now you're initiating, you're positive. If I have a charge that's pushing energy out, it's impossible for me to push something beyond that charge.
Yeah.
And so this is what happens. So for the first from womb until 13 years old, every child is absorbing at an unconscious level and a subconscious level the inner deficiencies, the insecurities, the limiting beliefs, and all of the fears of their parents and their environment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really powerful. And it's amazing that we actually do carry this into adulthood. And,
Yeah.
I've done so much work on me and healing my traumas. I just had a huge full circle moment in my life this past August where I really feel like, oh, you know,
Freedom.
angels are singing. It's like, I mean, I've been doing work for 30 years, like self-help, life coaches, therapy, you name it, body work, energy work, all the things. But I had a full circle moment. And then I got an opportunity to have that moment proven to itself by returning back home. And I
Mm,
was no longer engaged, just like you were talking about. I was no longer engaged in the drama.
yep.
I see it for what it is. They don't have, I was the scapegoat child. I was the wild child, I couldn't be controlled. My dad, when he handed me off at my wedding, said to my husband, well, I try to beat it out of her. She's yours problem now. That was the handoff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was the idea, right?
Yeah,
That was the idea then that we could beat their personalities out of them.
yeah. Well,
And we can
not
get
this
them,
one.
yeah, we could get them constrained and constricted and tight and tense. And it was problematic,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I
Right.
get so happy when I see these kids now that are outspoken at 7 years old, 8 years old, and I was like, wow, I was like the quiet kid in the corner. If you told me
Yeah.
to do this, I did that
Yeah.
exactly the way that you told me to. And because I
A
went
little
to a
bit more
boarding
on the
school,
pleasing side. And I
yeah,
feel like I was really sent to my family to kind of like give them an opportunity to see a bigger picture of the world. I was curious. I wanted to explore everything, touch, taste, the whole
yeah,
thing. I was a little high-strung ADD kid, which we didn't believe that was a thing for girls back then. We didn't even really know about ADD then. Anyway, getting back on track, speaking of ADD. So I find it interesting what you're saying because I think that there's a lot of ways to go about it, but I love that you have condensed this into a 5-day program, which basically it's a little less than a vacation. And basically, you will take yourself on the best vacation of your life if you go do this.
for sure. And then I stay connected to you for 90 days. You check in every day and you're going through your process. So I'm going to teach you transmutations and attunements, and I'm going to show you how to transfigure your body back to wholeness. And then after 90 days, and during that time, they're off of the daily acceptable drugs. And then I tell them on day 91, look, if you want to, go back, grab your coffee, grab your alcohol, go do all the things that you used to do. Let me know how you feel tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And some are like, okay. And they go and do it, and I always hear back. Always hear back. I'll never do that again.
It's not
Because
pleasant. Once you've been off of it,
you can
coming back
feel the
onto
full
it
impact.
is this stark reality because it's just kind of like our hearing loss, our vision loss, whatever
Yeah,
it is, right? It's slow, incremental little pieces. And the more shit we eat, the more we want to eat shit, right?
for sure.
It just is out of control. But when we go on those healing cleanses, our body is like, whoo, that was amazing. And then we tend to want to drink those green drinks or whatever. My favorite juice of all time is just uh, carrot juice and oranges. That's one of
Yeah.
my favorite. That is like a sugar high for me
Yeah.
yeah, is like
Yeah.
carrot and orange juice. It's my favorite drink over big thick ice.
Mm, okay. So it sounds like you're pancreatonia. Um,
I don't
well,
know what that is, but we'll
yeah.
probably figure out in the future.
Yeah, well, anyone who's listening, if you want to study a Korean body type diet and go in and get the diagnosis, there literally is a guy in Los Angeles named Dr. Peter Yoon. He has an office downtown LA and his office in Orange County, and he does 8 Korean body type diet. And I suggest anyone to go see him because he's going to take a drop of blood, he's going to put it underneath a microscope. You're going to do dark field microscopy. You're going to get to see your blood in real time. It's different when you take your blood, you send it to a lab and they send you like these are the ranges that are acceptable and your calcium's too low or your hormones are too high. Very different. We're going to put the blood on the screen and we're going to look at it in real time. What's the shape? What's the motility? What's the size? What's the color? Okay, what's the size of your white blood cells? Oh, those are a little too small. Oh, okay, we see some bacteria there, we see some fungus, and you're going to be able to see it in real time. Once you see your blood, you can't ever ignore that. And then
Right?
he gives you a list of foods like these are the things that are causing your blood to look like that. Stop eating those, start eating these. This will get your blood to look like this. Every person who's gone back 3 months later, their blood was always absolutely perfect.
Wow.
It's
That's
never not
amazing.
happened, right?
That's amazing. How do you spell his last name?
Yoon, Dr. Peter Yoon.
I think I've heard about this guy when
Yeah,
I lived
so
in California years ago.
yeah, so when people come out to see me, I always send them to go see Dr. Peter Yoon.
That's awesome.
Because if you get your body right and you're eating the right foods, you're off the daily acceptable drugs, you're doing 15 to 20 minutes a day of transfiguration work, you're doing your 2 minutes before you go to sleep of transmutations and attunements, within 90 days, your overall state of wellness increases exponentially. And then there's no way to go back to the person that you were in terms of your inner deficiencies, your insecurities, your fears, and your limiting beliefs. I had a woman who came to see me because I was going to teach her how to work with her daughter, right? She came to see me. I hadn't seen her in 3.5 years. Okay. Every person who comes to see me is at least an inch and a half to an inch and 3/4 out of alignment when I measure their feet. Okay. I haven't seen her in 3.5 years. Her feet were absolutely perfect. The left side of the body was the same exact length as the right side of the body. 3.5 years later. So
Wow.
when you go through a true transformational process, it's instantaneous, permanent change. Instantaneous, permanent change. And I've seen the same thing over and over and over thousands of times
Yeah, that's amazing. And
because transformation can be set up as a science. And when you have someone who has a scientific mind and is able to deliver repeatable, verifiable results, we can start making assumptions about the outcomes because we've seen the outcomes be the same way every single time.
because they're repeatable.
That's the key.
So tell listeners if they want to learn more about you, what is the book that you wrote and
I
where can
wrote
we find it?
I wrote a book called Free for Life. Go
Hmm.
to truebodyintelligence.com. I would get the audio version of the book. If you're that type of person you want to take notes, get both. But the audio version of the book, I'm going to give you a transmission, an energetic transmission, because the voice always contains the person's development. Now, there's a reason why that's important. All nervous systems vibrate to the highest functioning nervous system in a collective field. So if I've achieved a certain state of development, and you want to get to that state, well, you have to be able to hear my voice because that tone, that energy, that consciousness, that transformation, that
Frequency.
growth
Yeah.
is in the voice.
Yeah.
And so if you listen to the audio version of the book, and there's one that I developed that has energetic attunements. And if you do one of those attunements every night before you go to sleep, you're already going to start transforming your life in a very big way for a very small investment.
Hmm. That's awesome. I'm going to a sound bath tonight.
Oh, wonderful.
Isn't that great? I'm so excited about it. It's been
So,
a while since I've been.
so my book is at truebodyintelligence.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And truebody.com is where you can sign up for your course
Well,
and
truebodyintelligence.com.
okay,
It's
truebodyintelligence.com.
.com. If they read the book and they order the book, they can set up a connection call. Connection call is free. We'll be on the phone for 30 minutes to an hour through Christina Lynch, which is my assistant. And all they do is go to truebodyintelligence.com. They finish reading the book. The email is at the website. You email Christina, hey, I finished the book. I want to have a connection call with Christopher. We'll get on the phone. And if
Okay.
I can give, I will always give you some guidance that helps you, even if you're like, nah, I don't think that I want to go through the 5-day process. I'm going to be able to lead you to someone or something that's going to be highly beneficial.
That's awesome. Well, I love it. And I'm really curious to learn more. And I
Yeah.
haven't had the chance to go listen to your book. So I'm going to go do that this week. That is amazing. Thank you for being on
Okay.
my
You're
show
welcome.
today. Before we wrap it up, I'd like to ask you, you've been through this transformation in your life and you've been able to help so many other people. What to you, what is the value of resiliency?
I mean, for me, resilience is everything, right? Meaning that the body of work that I've been fortunate enough to download and to co-create is based on increasing one's resilience, right? Their emotional resilience, their psychological resilience, their energetic resilience, their physiological resilience, their structural resilience, so that they can achieve and experience more of the inherent potential in these times of vast and deep and broad evolution that's being set up for all of humanity to have an opportunity to embrace. And so for me, it's everything. And you
Yeah.
hear, I'm a sports fan, so I listen to commentary all the time. And the word they're always talking about is resilience, one's ability to get back up and to address what's in front of them with an open, loving heart, with kindness, with care, and with consideration.
I
And
love
if you,
that. That's probably my
yeah,
favorite description of resiliency and the power that
yeah,
it can be that I've ever
yeah,
heard on my show. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah. And if you have that, if you have that inside of you, you're lending that to everyone in your sphere of influence when they're in your presence.
Absolutely.
And so, what could be more important than being loving, kind, caring, and considerate? Considering
Absolutely.
where the other person is coming from.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being a guest. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I'll be
Thank
sure
you.
to give you the information when it comes out so that you can share it on your channels. Um, Thank you for my listeners today. If you want to learn more or if you have a story that you'd like to share, you can reach me at 888-relentless@gmail.com or reach out through social media. On Facebook, it's Relentlessly Resilient, and on Instagram, Relentlessly Resilient Podcast. Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles others are dealing with in their life.